All right, so we're finally ready to make our to-do list app. Before we start, I'm just going to show you a slightly new method I'm going to use to create the app. In fact, we're going to use the tabbed application template rather than the single view application, just to get a bit of variety in the templates that we use. So let's just quickly see that in action, and then I'll show you the app that we're going to create and give you a chance to make it yourself. So I'll just call it to-do list, save it on the desktop, and the handy thing about this template is that we now have a two-view controller setup without having to do any work on our part. So having a quick look at the storyboard, we now have three view controllers here. We have a tab bar controller, which essentially controls the tab bar or toolbar at the bottom. And we have a first view controller and a second view controller, which are of course associated with first view controller.swift, which is very familiar, and second view controller.swift, which again is very familiar. So what this template really does for us is set up the navigation side of things so that we don't have to worry about that. And here we go. So we have our first view, and we can jump straight to the second view and back again just by clicking the tabs at the bottom. So that's ideal for our to-do list app and saves us bothering with segues that we create ourselves. All right. So let's have a look at the app we're going to create. And here it is. So the main first view controller is simply a table view containing the user's to-do list items. Then when they want to add a new item to the list, they just click the Add an Item button, which will take them to this page. And then they can add new items in the usual way, just by typing. And then of course they can tap outside of the keyboard or on the Done button to get rid of the keyboard. And then they tap Add, and notice that this is now reset for them to add another one if they want to. We won't do that here, but we will jump back over to To-Do List, and then you can see that that's been added there. I'm going to give you a hint that you'll need a method called viewDidAppear to make that work properly. So you might want to note that down, as you might want to do a little bit of Googling about that one. And finally, if an item is done, the user can swipe to remove an item from the table and just click the delete button. And then not only is it removed from the table itself, but it's removed permanently from the app data. That's of course something we haven't done yet, so you're going to need to do a little bit of Googling to figure out how to do that. Don't worry if you don't manage it, I cover it all in this video. All right then, so that's what we're after. Best of luck, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, I hope that went well. It was a toughie, so don't worry if you didn't get all the way to the end. Let's get cracking. So first, let's edit our tabs, which we do over here. There's our tab bar item. So this first page is going to be our to-do list. So I think a circle is perfectly fine for that one. And this page is going to be where we add an item. Okay, that will automatically update over here as well. So we don't need to worry about doing that separately. So let's sort out the to-do list view controller first. We'll get rid of those labels. And we're going to bring in, of course, a table view. So let's set it up nicely, stretch it all the way down to the bottom there. and we're going to have constraints all the way around. There we go. And then we'll add a prototype cell. We'll drag to create outlets for the data source and the delegate. And then we'll add reuse identifier to the cell. Great. Now this is first view controller. So let's jump over to first view controller and just add our table code, which we're hopefully painfully familiar with now. So we've got UI table view delegate and UI table, let's type in a bit more, view data source. There we go, and it's the data source that we need to grab the code from. So that was a control click and then copying the top two methods, going back and pasting them in, getting rid of the code we don't need anymore, adding in curly brackets, and using the automatic fix to replace public with internal. All right, and for now, I'm just going to return 1. So we just have one item in our table just for testing purposes. And now let's create our cell, which is a UI table view cell, which we're creating with a style and an identifier. So the style is UI table view cell style dot default as usual, and the cell identifier is just cell. Then we're going to set the text label, which is an optional, but we're okay with that. And we're going to set the text to test. And finally, we'll return the cell. Okay, yep. Whenever I create a table, I always run a quick test before I do anything more advanced, just to make sure that everything's connected up all right. While that's loading, I'll just do a bit of editing on the second view. So we'll have a label at the top. This is where the user is going to add a new to-do list item. So we'll keep the layout very simple. So we'll center horizontally in the container and then set the upper constraint to link to the top of the screen there. Oh, it looks like our table is ready. Let's have a quick look. There we go. So we've got test and that all works great. Brilliant. So let's carry on with our second view controller. We'll need a text field, which as usual, I'll stretch to the guidelines near the edge of the screen. And we'll link that up with 3 constraints, top, left, and right. And we'll add a placeholder, e.g. get milk. So something very simple. And then a button, which will simply say add. I'll move that up just a touch. And we'll center that horizontally and align it to the text field. Okay, I think that's all we need for now. So let's set up some IB outlets. You'll notice it's cleverly chosen the second view controller because that's the view controller I had selected. always worth checking that you're not creating outlets in the wrong viewcontroller.swift file. So the only ones we really care about are the item text field. So I'll just create an outlet for that, and then we'll need an action for add. Just make it that lowercase. All right, so when the user adds an item, we're going to want to save that to permanent storage. And that is the tricky bit of this app, because we can't just save it as a separate item because we don't know how many items they have. So we'll need to create an array, and then that means we need to add it to the existing array. So let's first off attempt to pull back our items from permanent storage. So that's user defaults dot standard dot object, and we'll use the key items. So this is going to be an array. So if let items equal items object, and we're going to attempt to cast it as an NS array. So if that's the case, we want to add our new item to this array, but unfortunately an NS array is not changeable. So we can use a different type, NS mutable array. I wonder if you managed to Google to find a solution there. And now we can use items dot add object. And then we need to add in an array here. So we're just going to have an array which contains a single item, and that is going to be item text field dot text. And remember, that is an optional, but we can be pretty certain it has a value because we know that the item text field exists and is there. It might be an empty string, but even that is a value, so we can quite safely use the exclamation mark to force unwrap that. Okay. If that's not the case, then we need to create a new array. So we'll just let items equal an array with item text field dot text unwrapped in it. And actually, it hasn't come up with an error there, but I'm going to change that to a var because we would need to update the items array there. Okay, so now we just need to save items. So we use user defaults dot standard dot set, and the value is going to be items for key items. Okay, it's not happy there because of the unresolved identifier items. So even though we've created it both there and there, I think what we should do is set items up as initially an empty NS mutable array, and then we don't need to define it later on. We can just use another variable. I'll call it temp items, and then if this works, we can let items equal temp items, and then add the object onto that mutable array. And if not, we just set items equal to the array with the text field in it. So we're either adding on the contents of the text field to the existing array, or we're creating a new array and then saving that. Either way, we should end up with a permanently stored array of items that the user has saved. One nice feature here, I think, would be to reset the item text field value to be empty so that the user can add multiple items very quickly if they want to. Okay, so now we've saved those items, we need to do something quite similar to display the to-do list items in the first view controller. So when the view is loaded, we're going to want to attempt to get the items. So I'm actually going to copy all of this code and bring it over into view.did_load and just get rid of what we don't need. So we don't need to update anything, but we do need to have an active array to be working with. So we'll use items object to bring our items back from user defaults. I'm actually going to define items up here because we're going to need to access it likely here as well. And so we'll set it initially to an empty array. And here we need to change, if there's no values in the user defaults, I think we want to leave that as is. So we'll leave it as an empty array if there's nothing saved by the user. All right, so now we can use items.count as the number of items in our table. And we can use items, and we want index path dot row. That's the number in the items array that we want to grab. Now this, I believe, is going to be an object, so we need to convert it to a string, which we can do either using string and then brackets, or as we can force that cast. And I know that's going to be okay because if there's anything saved in there, it's definitely going to be a string. If you really wanted to avoid using a force downcast, you could always get around it by doing something like cell label is an empty string, and then if let temp label is equal to, and here we use that, then cell label equals temp label, and then set that to cell label. And then here it becomes an optional downcast. Oh, and I need to spell cell label right as well. So that's a slightly more verbose way of doing it. Oh, and of course I need cell label to be changeable, so it should be a var. But this really avoids any chance of a crash. Not that there really was any chance before, but here, if in some crazy case it's not possible to cast our saved item as a string, then it will just give us a blank row in the table rather than a crash. All right, now this makes me a little nervous because we've done a lot of quite complicated work over two view controllers, and we haven't tested in between, mostly because we couldn't really test, because we can only add items here and we can only see items here. So with any luck, we'll be able to add an item and it will then appear on the table. The one thing at least that shouldn't happen is that the app should not crash. So let's have a look. We've got an empty list at the moment. We've lost our icon there. We'll check that. So add an item. So we'll use the example there. So get milk and then add. And then, here we realize one issue, that we haven't set up the keyboard yet. So we can't shut down the keyboard and go back to our table. So we'll add that to our to-do list for our app. But for now, we'll just restart the app. And we should now find that get milk appears on the table. There we go. Super. So that proves not only that our table is getting the data correctly, but as we opened it up from scratch, it is permanently saving it as well. So things are looking good. Let's have a quick look at why our icon has disappeared there. So it's showing correctly there, but not there, oddly enough. There we go. I think I just need to select the second image there. Let's select it there as well. Worth checking the first one. Okay, it's set there. So I think we're all right. Okay, let's now set up the keyboard to work appropriately. So remember, we need control drag from the text field to the view controller to add a delegate. And then this is all in second view controller. So we add a type of UI text field delegate. And then we'll need the touches began method. And there we'll add the code self.view.end editing is true. So that will shut down the keyboard when the user taps away from it. And then we also need text field should return. And there we use text field dot resign first responder and also return true. All right, so let's just try that again. And you'll notice that you may have thought in the previous video that controlling the keyboard wasn't that important, but it actually made the app unfunctional because the user couldn't reach the button to get back to the to-do list itself. Okay, here we go. We've got our icon back. That's great. Let's jump over to there and add another item to our list. And here we go. You'll notice that the keyboard isn't actually appearing. If that happens for you, then you'll likely need to toggle the software keyboard. There we go. Sometimes twice. There it is. Okay, I use Command K as the shortcut there. And just to check then, if I tap elsewhere or hit return, then that gets rid of the keyboard. Okay, let's add Learn Swift to our list. Aha, now we have our first crash. Not to worry about it. Let's have a look and see what's going on. Now the issue here appears to be with this NSMutable array. It's not keen on adding this object to it, possibly because it's not strictly mutable, even though we've cast it as an NSMutable array. So to try and get around that, I'm actually going to use a standard array of strings and then attempt to cast my items object to that type. And that, with any luck, will get us around the issue. And then we can use append rather than add objects to add our item text field dot text. Okay, let's try that out. Here we go. So let's try adding an item again. Have learn Swift in there and add. Okay, well, it didn't crash. So now let's try switching back to to-do list. Now the item isn't there, but let's just run the app from scratch again. And there you go, you can see it is adding it. It's just not updating the table when we jump back and forth between the two tabs. So this is the view did appear issue that I mentioned earlier. And let's see how we implement that. Essentially, we want the table to be refreshed when this view appears. So we can do that with the table reload method, which we've seen before. In order to do that, we'll need a outlet for our table view. So I'm just going to control drag that out there and we'll just call it table. There we go. And then switching back over to first view controller.swift. Instead of view did load, we're going to use view did appear. There we go, which is slightly different to view did load, and particularly when we're working on a tabbed app, view did load is not called every time we go back and forth between these two tabs, but view did appear is. So let's move our code down to view did appear, and we'll add a table dot reload data there as well. Okay, so let's now check that, and we should find that we can add an item and it appears immediately in the to-do list. So here we go. Let's click on add an item. And I'm going to add something that will do us a lot of good, I'm sure. Take a break. So let's add that. Then tap to close the keyboard and then back over to to-do list, and you can see that we've now got that item added on the list. Great. So all that remains is being able to delete these items. And I'm actually going to show you what I'd recommend Googling for something like this. Essentially, we want to delete items from table view, and we want to do it in Swift. So I'd go for something like that. And this top result looks pretty good. Delete rows from table in iOS 8. It's probably going to be the same in iOS 10. Okay, so we know all about the creating of the table itself. That's not a problem. Okay, so this is the bit that we're particularly looking for. Now we could just copy and paste this, but this was back in iOS 8, so we're quite likely to get some errors. So better to use this as a reference, but write our own code. Looks to me like commit editing style is the main name of this method that we're using here. Then we're checking to see if the editing style is of that type, so a type of delete essentially, then we remove that item. Okay, so actually what I'm going to do is copy it, but then recreate it myself. So let's add it in down here. In fact, we'll add it in as a comment. I think you've seen before, multi-line comment can be added with a slash and a star, and then finish with a star and a slash. So if we type commit editing style. There we go. We want that top one. So yes, you can see the actual format of the method has changed a fair bit since this version. So that's why it's generally better to create code yourself rather than copying and pasting, especially when your source is a couple of years old. So we've still got editing style there as a variable. So let's use that. If editing style is equal to UI table view cell editing style dot delete. So if the editing style is delete, then that means we want to delete the row. So I'm going to start by deleting the contents of the array, for which I'm going to use the Swift array type rather than NSMutable array, as we had problems before with editing NSMutable array. So now we can just take items and remove at, and the item we want to remove is indexPath.row. And then we just reload the table data. And we also want to save the data to user defaults. So I'm going to get that code straight from second viewController.swift and save it right there. So that should do it. That'll refresh the table after having removed the item from our items array. And just to check before we run that, we've got one warning. Ah yes, and we no longer need to do this check because we can be sure that items indexPath.row is indeed a string because it is of the type of an array of strings. All right, so let's give it a try. We should now be able to swipe to the left on any of the items, and then it will be removed both from the table and from the permanent data storage for the array. Let's check it out. Here we go. So I think we can take Learn Swift off our list, and then let's tap delete, and off it goes. Fantastic. So we can jump over, jump back, and the item is definitely gone. Wonderful. So that takes us to the end of the to-do list app. I hope you enjoyed making it, and I hope you managed to do a fair bit of it yourself, although there were a few tricky bits to respond to. We're going to move on from permanent storage though, and look at our final big topic of this section, and that is getting data from the internet and processing it to provide useful information to your users. This allows you to add a whole new level of power to your apps. So watch carefully, and let's find out how it's done.